Okay, let's well, it's great to be with you guys again. We have Shay and Spear with us tonight, and so we have some questions from Revelation chapter 17. So we'll jump in those and look at them. And Shay, why don't you ask our first question from Revelation 17?
Yes, sir. In 17 verse 3 we read, "And he carried me away in the Spirit into a wilderness." What does it mean to be carried away in the Spirit? Do you want me to read all of them at one time?
Just read
Okay.
the whole.
What does it mean to be carried away in the Spirit? Why was he carried away? Who carried him away? And finally, what does the wilderness represent?
Okay, let's kind of look at this a little bit. It's interesting that in the Bible, there are 4 passages in the book of Revelation that speak of John being in the Spirit. And they are in Revelation 1, Revelation 4, Revelation 17, the one we're looking at here, and then Revelation 21. So let's look at these. Spear, I think you have 1:10 and 4:1 and 2. So if you'll read Revelation chapter 1, verse 10.
Verse 10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like the sound of a trumpet.
So John writes in Revelation 1:10, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So he's in the Spirit on the Lord's day. First of all, what does it mean to be in the Spirit? What do you think?
In worship? In oneness? In unity?
Well, yes, but I mean, when John's using the term the Spirit here, what do you think he's referring
I think of it like a vision, almost like his soul's taking a journey and his body's still on the island.
And that's a real good possibility. We're not 100% sure, but I think that's what happened was that his soul, well, it was out of body experience, and I don't really know.
Right.
But in the Spirit, he is allowed to actually see these things occur. So he's in the first of all, he's in the Spirit on the Lord's day. There was a whole book of Revelation that he is in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and so Lord's day, we said church, it's Lord's day. You're thinking what?
Sunday.
Sunday.
Now, that's not what it's talking about here. The day of the Lord, the Lord's day, means a day when God reveals himself in a great way. And here we're talking about, obviously, the revelation of Jesus Christ, the time at the end, the same coming. So he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. So when he says, I was transferred in the Spirit forward, transported in the Spirit forward, to see the events of the end time. That's John gives us the revelation of Jesus Christ, ending in the return of Jesus Christ. That's what it means. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And then in chapter 4, he'll talk about being, in fact, read 1 and 2 of Revelation 4.
After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard, like the sound of a trumpet, speaking with me, said, Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. Immediately I was in the Spirit.
Okay,
And
let's stop it.
All right.
Okay. Where was he in the Spirit at? A door standing open where? In where?
in heaven.
Heaven. So he's in the Spirit in heaven. His Spirit is literally transported forward to heaven. So I was in the Spirit of the Lord's day, in kind of the whole book of Revelation, chapter 1. So he's seeing the entire events. And then his Spirit is transported to heaven. So he sees these events taking place in heaven. I was in the Spirit of the Lord's day. I was in the Spirit in heaven. Let's look at 21, then we'll come back to 17:3. Okay, read, I think you have 21:10, Shay.
Yes, sir. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God.
Notice this, his Spirit goes forward to a great high mountain, and he almost sees the holy city of Jerusalem coming out of heaven from God. Now remember, this is 21. He sees a new heaven and a new earth. So here he sees the new Jerusalem, the city of God, descending here. So he's in the Spirit. He literally sees the new Jerusalem, the city of God, the heavenly city, come down. So he sees, in the Spirit, he sees the day of the Lord, and Christ's return. He sees, and the events, not just Christ's return, but all the events kind of leading up to that. He sees heaven, in heaven, and he sees the New Jerusalem, the city of God, coming down at the end of the Revelation. So that leaves us with one more of these John in the Spirit passages, and that is 17:3. So, Spear, if you would read 17:3.
Sure. Flip over. 17:3.
Right.
And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns.
Okay. Actually, the other 3 in the Spirit references, the first one, the day of the Lord. Now, there's going to be a lot of judgment that culminates with the return of the Lord. In the Spirit in heaven, in the Spirit, and he saw the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God. So those are kind of positive. This is a negative thing. So he's in the Spirit in the wilderness. First of all, who carried him away?
He.
Who is he? Is that let me ask you, is that he?
That was good.
Well, let's give some more context to he. When you see a he in the Bible, is that he capitalized or uncapitalized? So that means it's not
the he.
It's not the he.
The he, there we go.
God, well, it'd be the God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. So
It was an angel.
yes, it is an angel. That's right. Okay, very good. So this angel carries him away. He's carried away so he can have these, why is he carried away? So he can have these visions of God of what will take place. And so that leaves us with one question. What does the wilderness represent, do you think?
Testing.
Yeah, it can represent testing. But usually when we think of being a wilderness and testing, yes, it is a difficult time someone's going through. It's somewhat of a bad place. So the wilderness is an untamed place. And so the context of what you see, and context is everything in the Bible. You have to put everything in context to understand. So when you see the context of it here, and you see the woman, the harlot, riding the beast, and all these things, you know that it's a place that is not good, and it represents a place where God is not recognized as being in control. Now, God's in control of everything in a broad sense, but so he's carried away in the wilderness, so he's going to see something take place. And what he's going to see in the wilderness is going to be not good in a sense. It's going to be those that have rejected God, those that have declared war against God, so to speak. So it's interesting. So these spirit passages, and some people will actually define the whole book of Revelation in terms of these in the spirit passages. They'll say in the spirit of the Lord's day, in the spirit of heaven, in the wilderness, and on the high mountain. I don't think that's the best way at all to divide up the book of Revelation and try to study it. But that is one way it's kind of divided up. So anyway, that pretty much covers that question. So let's go to our second question, Shay.
Okay. In Revelation 17:1, what is meant by the woman who sits on many waters, and why is she called the great harlot?
Okay. So she is called the great harlot. In the Bible, a prostitute can obviously reference a literal prostitute, a sexually immoral person, woman. Although there are male prostitutes, but anyway, a sexually immoral person. But it also can be a metaphor for something. What do you think is a metaphor or a picture of?
Idolatry?
Yes, exactly. The book of
Bingo.
Hosea goes into a lot of that. Ezekiel talks about it. But idolatry is represented, spiritual unfaithfulness is pictured by harlotry, prostitution. And so, and that's pretty common. In fact, it makes total sense if you think about it. Not only is it a metaphor, but something very real, because the church is considered to be the bride of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually 3 women in the book of Revelation, but 2 of them that kind of contrast. One represents Israel, the woman Israel, in Revelation 12. But that's a little bit different. But there are 2 women. One's a prostitute. The other is the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And these 2 women are clearly, one represents something good and one represents something bad. And so the harlot, the great harlot, represents a system that has rejected God. Now, the interesting thing about this harlot is very religious. In fact, Revelation 17, the whole thing about Revelation 17 is that there's a religious system in opposition to God. And so the harlot represents this religious system in opposition to God. So that I'll tell you something. Satan doesn't care if you're religious. In fact, you are a religious person. And you're going to choose a religion more than likely, in some way, shape, or form. But you got to be careful. does that religion truly worship God? And I'm not just talking about, false religions, but even in Christianity. How many churches can you go to today that don't really teach the truth of the Bible?
Mm.
Lots.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of keep that in mind. So that's kind of one. But so what are the many waters, do you think?
I think we talked about that a few weeks ago about being the nations or the people, the many nations.
Read Revelation 15, verse 15 of chapter 17.
I must have been absent.
Verse 15 of chapter 17.
I'm going to be good tonight.
And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues.
Okay, so
I cheated.
the waters are, what it says, that they represent many people, nations, multitudes, and tongues. So that there's just something that they're nations. They represent the nations of the world. So, read chapter verse 1 again of 17. So let's put this in context again.
Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters.
Okay, let's think about this. Okay, I'm going to show you the judgment of the false religious system that the nations of the world have bought into. And that's kind of a way of interpreting that.
Mhm.
And that's what that is this false religious system is being judged. And she's literally deceived the whole world, these false religious systems. And some people try to ascribe it to one false religious system, but I don't think that's accurate. The nation, the whole world. Satan really doesn't care what you believe as long as you don't believe in Jesus Christ. I mean, if you want to, it's just fine. Pick your poison. You can worship anybody you want to, except Jesus Christ, for a period of time. Now, this is fascinating, because what you're going to see in the end is that, well, I'll leave that for the next question or two. You see something fascinating in the end here. So, anyway, let's kind of move on to the next question, number 3, if you want.
Okay. In chapter 17, verse 3, the woman is adorned with precious stones and holding a gold cup, which are typically used as implements for holy rituals. Is she dressing up to mock the priest and their ceremonial practices, or is she trying to deceive people into following the beast, or maybe some of both?
I would say yes, somewhat of both, but you have to be careful with this question because, actually, a very good question, but I should say be careful with the way that we answer this question because sometimes things that are used as holy rituals may not be good things. Now, what God gave to the priests in the nation of Israel, in the Bible, the Old Testament, those are always good things. A lot of them get corrupted later on because people don't follow through in obedience to God the way that they are supposed to. But the second part of this question, is she dressing up to mock the priest and the ceremonial practice, or is she trying to deceive the people into following the beast? This whole thing's about deception. And so that's what is being done. Just think of this, okay, of this verse in terms of she's adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a cup full of abominations, okay? Have you ever seen a church that was kind of all about glitz? Kind of like we have the latest and the greatest, and come and we can entertain you, and we can, you can come and we've got the, fantastic music and stuff. Satanic false worship always appeals to the flesh. Remember that. False worship always appeals to the flesh. There's nothing wrong with good music, okay? But is it primarily speaking to my flesh, or is it primarily speaking to my spirit, my soul? So that's something to remember. Whatever Satan's going to throw out as a false religious system is always going to appeal to the flesh and not the spirit. Or if it appeals to the spirit, it's going to be in a bad way. So, yes, she is, I would say primarily, she is trying to deceive the world into following the beast. This is really pretty stunning and pretty fascinating because, remember, when you take the mark of the beast, and these here have taken the mark of the beast, okay? And remember, you have to worship the beast. Well, at this point, when you get to this point, he's going to do something to the harlot. And what happens to a harlot when she's all used up?
She's tossed.
Discarded. Yeah. And so this is fascinating, because I'll go ahead and say this, even though this can come later on. You know who will eventually destroy this false religious system?
The beast.
The Antichrist himself.
Mhm.
When he's got what he wants to out of her, he will destroy her. And at that point, in the midpoint of tribulation, he's going to say, now you worship me.
Mhm.
I've used these false religious systems. Now you will worship me directly. That's pretty fascinating,
Mhm.
because Satan always wants worship. Always wants worship.
Brother Tim, could I add something?
Yeah, I'm talking way too much.
to
So you say all you-
No, I would just, while we're on this, this is one of the things that jumped out at me is, one, this is John writing it, disciple of Christ. He's in the Spirit, and he's with an angel, and it said that he wondered greatly when he saw this. And then the angel said, why did you wonder, or why did you, the King James says, why did you marvel? So I think this must have been quite a sight because John is in the Spirit and he marveled.
Yes.
It must be, really something.
There's also in the context, and we won't get here tonight, we'll talk about this more next week, that God does not want us to wonder. Because many people that follow the beast and false religious wonder. You think you walk in, you see everybody worshiping a false religious system, you're taken up into it, and God says, he says to John, why do you wonder? I don't want you to wonder about this. I want you to know the truth
Mhm.
about what's going on. Because you can easily be deceived. You hear that? You can be deceived. Deception was Satan. And so many people are being deceived and drawn away. And he does not want us to be deceived. And when you marvel and wonder, that can open something up. Now, John said, the angel said, why do you wonder?
Mhm.
Let me tell you the truth. God always tells the truth in his word. Because left our own devices, we will miss the truth. And that's really important, what he said there.
Mhm.
Read that again, because I think that's important. We need to know what God is telling us.
Okay, this is from chapter 17, verse 6.
Right.
It says, And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly. And verse 7, the angel said to me, why do you wonder?
Have you ever seen a church and you first walked in it and you said, there's nothing of the holiness of God here? You ever kind of had that, it's kind of like, if the Holy Spirit ever hits the warning button in your spirit, you better listen.
Mm.
Because I will say this, if you don't pay attention to the warning, the seduction of the world is so strong,
Mhm.
trust me, you can easily be pulled into it. And I'm really scared, I will frankly say, I'm really scared for a lot of people today, because I see them being pulled in to things that are not going to have a good outcome. And, Satan can make things look really good. He really can.
Right.
And so, anyway, we need to be careful about that. So, let's move on to the fourth question. Our time to get away from us too much tonight.
We have discussed Babylon symbolism before, but can you review that in relation to the mysterious name on the woman's forehead?
Yeah, that's interesting. Read verse 5.
And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abomination of the earth.
It was not unusual, especially in Roman times, for a prostitute to actually be identified. Sometimes they would actually be tattooed. Sometimes they would have something on their head that would identify what they were. But I kind of know where false religious systems start. And so, take this whole imagery of a woman who is a harlot for these false religious systems. The false religious systems go back to Babylon. And that's why it says Babylon, the mystery. In fact, read Revelation 10, 8 through 10. We're not going to have any time to get into this. Maybe I can just whet the appetite of people here, but this passage of Scripture.
Revelation 10
I'm
or?
sorry, Genesis.
Oh,
10.
okay.
Oh, I got that.
Other end of the Bible.
Okay. Yeah, the complete other end. Yeah, I got that one.
So, okay. Genesis, and this is talking about as Babylonianism first gets its start with a man named Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. Okay?
Okay. Genesis 10:8-10. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech. Am I saying that right? Erech. And Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
There you go.
If I did all right with that.
That's good.
I'm glad you got that one.
Well, South Woodrise, some of those names. Anyway, that's good. But anyway, Nimrod is a mighty hunter before the Lord. He's actually a mighty hunter against the Lord, is what it means there. Kind of a quick interpretation of that. And the other thing was, what is he hunting?
What is Nimrod hunting?
Yeah, he's hunting, mighty hunter. He's hunting souls. Okay, this is the beginning of a whole system of Babylonianism. We talked about that before, which is a system of opposition to God. Remember, they built a tower, the beginning of a one-world government. What you see there, you see come to the end in Revelation 18. And so, this whole system of Babylonianism is a world in opposition to God that kind of sucks people in. He is a hunter of souls. This whole system pulls people in. And so this, the mother of harlots, read again Revelation 17:5, Shay.
And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth.
Yes. So these false religious systems draw people in. And they draw people away from God. And again, it is how you worship in the flesh. There's a whole thing with Nimrod going back to kind of false religion having to do with Semiramis, and Tammuz, and I'm not getting into that. There's way too much. But it's the creation that he had a wife, and then there was a false resurrection. Where do you see this again? In Revelation 13. But there's nothing new, okay? This stuff goes back forever, and it comes out again. But anyway, let me just suffice it to say that all false religious systems can be traced back to this point. And they work so that in the end time, you have these false religious systems. And early in the Antichrist reign, the first 3.5 years before the mark of the beast is required, everything else, he's utilizing this false religion to accomplish his will. Satan uses all these religious systems to draw you away from the true and living God. In the end, he's going to destroy them all because he doesn't need it. And he's going to require worship. Remember Matthew and then parallel in Luke, in a very short version in Mark, of the temptation of Christ as he goes to the wilderness.
Yep.
The last one in Mark, in Matthew, is that he says to Jesus, all of these I will give to you if you will what?
Worship me.
Okay. Satan's always been wanting worship. And if he tries to tempt Jesus to worship him, what do you think he's going to do to you? I mean, that's pretty bold.
Pretty
That
bold. Yeah,
is.
bold is the word that came to my mind.
I mean,
Yes.
That's not the word that came to my
Yeah.
mind, but I don't think it's appropriate
Yeah,
for
okay.
question and answer.
But it's pretty stunning. And it's really easy to entrap people and to entice people into these things. That's why you always have to guard your heart. Because it can really happen. So, but anyway, Babylonianism is a whole system in opposition to God. But it goes back to the beginning, And there's nothing, as Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah, technology changes, everything like that changes. But the way Satan works, it's not new. I mean, there's only so many temptations he uses, but in those temptations, he has something for everyone. So, anyway, let's move on to the last question. I know we want to get home at a certain hour, so.
All right, in chapter 17, verse 7, the woman is pictured riding the beast, and the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. Why is the woman riding the beast? And again, exactly what is the beast? And finally, why does the beast have 7 heads and 10 horns?
Why is the woman riding the beast? What would you say? And the answer is that the beast supports her. The beast kind of is the one that she's riding on the empire of the Antichrist. So there's a close relationship. The Antichrist is using her to draw people to himself. Remember, at this time, during the tribulation, you have 144,000, you have the two witnesses, you have angels circling the world, remember that, back in Revelation 14, preaching the eternal gospel. You have the warning of worship God and fall is Babylon. And if anyone takes the mark of the beast, he will be tormented for it. You have these 3 warnings, or evangelistic outreach, or however you want to describe it. And so, the false religious system is in opposition, saying, no, that's not the true gospel, follow us. So the woman is literally this false religious, these false religious systems. There are many, not just one. You have a particular desire for a particular religious system, Satan will give it to you. What flavor do you like? Chocolate, vanilla, whatever, strawberry, there's about 10 million different religious systems out there you can choose to follow. And they're already there, but during this time, they will be utilized. So that's what it means when it says the woman is riding the beast. That's who supports her. He's supporting her. And exactly, again, what is the beast? The beast is the Antichrist and his world system. It's interesting that in Revelation 17, it's sometimes referred to as religious Babylon. Sometimes chapter 18 is referred to as political and economic Babylon. Because Babylonianism has a political system, it has an economic system, it's got a military system too, but it also has a religious part, and that is what is talked about in 17. And this religious system will be destroyed by the Antichrist himself after she has, again, gotten him what he wants to have. So her time is limited. As is the Antichrist, but hers is more limited than the Antichrist. So why is she riding the beast? This is how she is supported, okay? So what is the beast? The beast is the Antichrist and his system. And the 7 heads and the 10 horns, okay? This is interesting, and there are many different ideas, but I'll tell you what I'm absolutely convinced the 7 heads are. The 7 heads, the reason the kingdom of the Antichrist, or Babylonianism, is pictured as having 7 heads, is there have been 7 kingdoms down through the world that have tried to dominate the world. You go back to Egypt, Assyria, Babylon the Great. First, Babylonianism is kind of a takeoff on the whole thing. Okay. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. That's 6. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, time of Nebuchadnezzar, Medo-Persia, which is one, 2-part Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. That's 6. Okay, that's 6 heads. Where's the 7th head?
Yet to come.
Yes. 5 is fallen. 1 is, it's talking about Rome. The other has not yet come. And that's a reference to the Antichrist. When it says, and we'll get into this next year, this is next week, next year, maybe next year, who knows. When it says, it speaks of the 8th that was part of the 7th, that's speaking of the Antichrist himself. The 7th is his kingdom.
Okay.
So anyway, that's why he has 7 heads. Now, why does he have 10 horns?
Could the 7 heads too also be to mimic perfection, just like he's trying to do?
It's interesting. Every time I go through the book of Revelation, I get a new thought. But yes, that could very well be true. Because 7 is the number of perfection. And yes, it could be that. There's another thought, which I don't believe at all, that Rome was built on 7 hills and all this represents Rome and all this past history. I'm not going to go there. I don't at all believe that's wrong. This is future prophecy. If that was all you had, yeah, there might be something to it. When you put context being everything, when you put context in it, that's very important. So, yes. Okay, but our time is getting away from us, but let's spend a couple of minutes as we close here. talking about the 10 horns. What do those represent?
I know horns usually represent power.
Yeah.
So is that maybe 10 kings to
Very
come?
good. 10 kings. And what it really tells us, and remember the statue in Daniel that has the 10
10
toes?
toes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What the 10 represents is that in its final form, the empire of the Antichrist, the future empire, the one yet to come, will have 10 kings. Now, because we'll tell us later on in other passages that the Antichrist himself will actually supplant 3 of those kings and pull them up by the roots, so to speak, and take place. But anyway, not to get too deep into the weeds there. The 10 horns represent the fact that the empire of the Antichrist will have 10 kings that come together in a federation, okay? The last empire, world empire, ruled by the Antichrist is a federation, a confederation of many nations that come together. And there are either going to be 10 of them, or there'll be 10 prominent ones that kind of lead the way in that federation. And so that's what that means when it says, okay, she's riding this beast. The beast, remember what it says in 1 John, many antichrists have gone out in the world. Okay, this opposition, this desire for a one world government has always been there, going back to the Tower of Babel, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the final form of the one world government is what is to come, and the Antichrist is to rule that. He will utilize 10, and there's a lot of things we'll look at next week. Talk about how they give their power to the beast for for a period of time to accomplish. And so what eventually happens to the harlot? What eventually happens to the harlot? Read Revelation 14, 17, 14, and we'll close with this. You can read it, Spear. I hope I have the right word.
These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them because he is. Keep going.
Yeah, go ahead and read on. About
'Cause
3 verses here.
He is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire.
So it won't be a good end to the harlot.
No, it will not.
I mean, how many more things can we do? Burn her up with fire, make her naked, eat her flesh. I mean, it's pretty graphic. So she will have the sad end that harlotry always brings. And so, in the end, these nations that form the empire of the Antichrist will destroy the harlot. And they kind of, in a sense, say, game's over.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to worship the Antichrist and de facto worship Satan himself. Think of that. Satan has always wanted to be worshipped. I will make myself like the Most High. Even he said to Jesus, I will give you the kingdoms of the world if you will bow down and worship me. But the truth is that his kingdoms will one day be ripped out of his hands. And he is, in a sense, Satan is the God of this world, the prince of power of the air. So in some sense, he is the usurper who is the king of this world system in opposition to God. But he's going to make a push at the end to get direct worship, but we know what happens to him in the end.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other thoughts before we close?
That was good.
Fascinating study here as we
Yeah.
look at this. And I would say, I think you can see why there's such a, as we close tonight, remind everyone what Revelation 1:3 says, blessed is he who reads and those who hear and heed the words of prophecy, for the time is at hand. And I just wonder how many churches really, kind of get into these things. And not that we have all the answers, but we need to know that there comes a day of reckoning and we need to be right with the Lord.
Amen.
God bless. Y'all have a great evening.